I got to spend this past Thursday in my happy place, Camp Ramah in the Berkshires. I spent 14 summers there, 7 as a camper, 7 on staff. I'm in regular contact with at least a dozen of my friends from Ramah. And Thursday was Rabbi and Educator Day, and I was able to bring Morel Tomer, our youth educator, to really come and see what I would say is one of the most successful parts of the conservative movement. If you want to sort of take a microcosm of a bunk of 12-year-olds, in 1989, there were 15 of us in a bunk. We were 12, and there was an 18-year-old counselor named Joshua Cherry, you might know. And out of those 15, 5 of us are rabbis. I know at least 2 of them who have already been president of their congregation. Many of them are all active Jews, and 1 is a professor in Holocaust studies. So you could say that it prepares people for Jewish life and being Jewish connected, even if they don't always become rabbis. The Ramah movement is really kind of a microcosm of the conservative movement, and that there are 9 sleepaway camps in North America. There are several day camps. There is a Ramah presence in Ukraine, obviously struggling with what's going on right now, as well as a Ramah presence in Israel. They have a day camp, and they run a seminar for kids going into 12th grade. So our own Mitchell Bloom is on that trip right now. This is seminar number 3, I guess the middle, where I'm sort of discussing where we fit in to the conservative movement. How are we as individuals? How are we as a congregation? I've looked at sort of some of the past, and now we're sort of getting into the here and now. When people always ask, well, what is conservative Judaism? Our sign says we are a conservative egalitarian congregation. How do you define it? And to some people's chagrin, it's not been easy to define, even throughout its whole history, what makes someone conservative versus other terms that we have, Orthodox, Reform. There seems to be a spectrum. Often things don't fall in exact points on lines. And yet, you have lines, if we're going to use that metaphor, if you're off too far off the line, then you don't be able to at least identify yourself in whatever group that you are thinking about. So groups need to have boundaries. Even if they're a little amorphous, you have to be able to, on a case-by-case basis, say, I know when someone is totally out when I see it. And so you need to have a discussion of what are those boundaries. And there have been many, many attempts on how to define conservative Judaism. And I'm going to give you mine. And I'm going to do it in a short period of time. I guess if I ever want to write a book, I could, sort of write a book about this. And so we should use this for our own thinking about, sort of the boundaries. Also, because you're going to see, been discussion, especially when I get to Israel. So here is my sort of a few tenets that really defines what someone is a conservative Jew, or really if they're outside. And you guessed it, the first one is conservative Jews are Zionists. If we're going to go to our Camp Ramah example, if you want a trivia question, what was the first Camp Ramah? I'm sure the Werbers will answer. 1947, up in Wisconsin, as David also said. Okay? And they founded it as a Zionist camp. It was before 1948, by the way. And they said, this was trying to do ideals. Ramah's always trying to create an ideal community, and they've had to adapt. But they said at that time that they were only going to speak Hebrew. And I bet when David went to camp as a Ramah alum, they only spoke Hebrew. At least they really tried to. In the public space, they only spoke Hebrew. So we can see here already that there's a Zionist idea, that this is the place where we recognize that in the 20th century, at this time, the best way to live Judaism, and yes, to respond to all of the persecution, the Holocaust always loomed large, even though that was not the only place that Jews experienced persecution, that having a state of Israel was a movement into Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, the bringing about of a redemption, and that to have a real, live, and yet imperfect state was something that we needed to celebrate. And so conservative Judaism, obviously through Ramah, but through its synagogues, always promotes Israeli culture, Israeli exchange, visiting to Israel. We, even if we do not live our lives in Israel, our hearts are always there. And so now I have to bring up a little bit of current events, because Ramah was at least in the Jewish news. There was a periodical called the Jewish Insider, and it brought to light just only this week, I guess, an incident from the fall, when we have Ramah alumni who, for whatever reason, have chosen to pull away from the Zionist camp. They have joined the various groups of Jews that are against the state of Israel and using all of those crazy terms, genocide and all those things. And people obviously have, some of them done it quietly, some of it have done it publicly. And so there was a woman, an alumna of Camp Ramah in New England, in Palmer, Massachusetts, who wanted to apply to be a division head. And she had been public on social media of her involvement with Jewish Voices for Peace, which is a staunchly anti-Zionist, and used that term, organization. And the director interviewed her, and they brought up, and he said, the director, Ramah is a Zionist institution. We are going to be spending this summer especially celebrating and teaching our children to support the state of Israel. Would you be willing to support that mission? This woman said no, and she wasn't hired. And it obviously came to public. And some of her fellow alumni then, of course, challenged the director and challenged the camp and did so publicly, sort of saying, well, what about pluralism? Isn't a camp about pluralism and about freedom of speech, and we have to be able to dialogue? And the answer is not in camp, not in a school setting, not in a formal setting like this, because this is part of the conservative movement, and we define ourselves as Zionists. Yes, it's a free country. We do believe in the First Amendment, so we're not going to exclude you from that. And I would say at another time we can discuss, what if these people are in our family? Do we cancel culture them? I'm not so sure we do that either. But we have to have the hard, difficult discussions, not in our institutions. Our institutions, if we define ourselves, we can say this is Zionistic space. And so that's why I have that definition. And then we can add some more, which again also allows us to treat these people nicely, is the next part for me for conservative Judaism is recognizing that we are B'nai Brit, like B'nai Brit. We are the people of the covenant. The Torah is about having a covenant with God and with the people, and yes, with the land. So putting Zionism here for sure, but now we can focus on God and the people. However we define God, there is a notion that God is devoted to us and we are devoted to God. And how do we show that devotion? through mitzvah, through rituals that have refined over millennia to help us recognize the meaning and just grandeur of this universe and this world, and saying, we believe there is a Ribono Shel Olam, a master of the universe. And so we are going to strive to do the mitzvot in the name of God. And then there are also mitzvot between each other. First, between B'nai Brit, because we have a connection, and yes, to other fellow human beings. But there's different definitions on how we show devotion. Concentric circles. Family first, obviously, then the Jewish people, then the world. And so we do that by showing our devotion and chesed towards one another. And I mentioned lines are gray. It's always hard to sort of know whether we want to put someone in or not. I mentioned earlier about Jews who I consider Jews family members, who I certainly love and am devoted to, who say, oh, I love eating pork spare ribs. So are they outside of the pale? Or, obviously want to put an example that puts us there, the Jews for Jesus movement. You have people who are Jews for Jesus who every day will go and put on tefillin and take a prayer book and look like they're Jews. So, who is the Jew? Who is inside the tent? You can see by my answer that my pork-eating family is inside the tent, because we still see each other as B'nai Brit, even if we're not there yet. But when someone says, I'm a Jew for Jesus, which is an oxymoron, at least in the definition of Judaism for us, they are outside our tent. Doesn't mean I'm going to go and kill them, God forbid, but I'm going to see them with different glasses. And so that, for me, standing on one foot, is kind of what defines conservative Judaism, that we sort of have a realm of mitzvot. We can get into sort of egalitarianism, recognizing that we want women to be equal, while also respecting our Orthodox brothers and sisters who see things differently, because that's in the same camp. They're not conservative Jews, so we have kind of Venn diagrams. But if we're going to focus on conservative, then we go to that egalitarian, Zionistic, sort of recognizing that we live in a realm of mitzvah, one that we're always striving for. We might not be in the exact place where our Orthodox brethren are, but that's what puts us in the camp. And now for the teaser for next week. We know that intermarriage is a huge thing here in the United States and really in the non-Orthodox world. And that's what the conservative movement is struggling with, was where does this fit in sort of the tent? And where does the role of the rabbi fit? And we don't have an answer yet, and we're kind of moving all sorts of way because we want to have that important dialogue and know that there has to be sort of boundaries in the tent. So again, that is the teaser for next week. Where does intermarriage fit into all this? Shabbat Shalom.